We're going to take a look here at endomorphs in Lightwave. Endomorphs, or morphs, are Lightwave's version of what is commonly called shapes or blend shapes in some other packages, and you'll find that for the most part they behave in pretty much the same way. So basically, when you want an endomorph, it is a vertex map, much like a weight map in a way, and you just create them in Modeler, so new endomorph. Choose a name for it. You have the types, relative and absolute. Now, absolute is not accessible in layout, only relative is. As such, relative is the only one that's any good for doing rigging processes with, so you'll pretty much always create your morphs as relative. So, once you have created your morph, you can then remodel your mesh into some new shape, and that is stored as a morph. We can see, flicking here between the base and the morph, the two different shapes that we have. Pretty simple, and for the most part that's really all there is to it in Modeler. What we see in layout is that morphs are a kind of displacement because they are moving the object's vertices around. You can get at the morphs embedded in an object either by adding the morph mixer displacement from here, like this, or alternatively, in more recent versions of Lightwave for quickness, you've got the morph mixer button here that you can click, and that will automatically add the displacement modifier for you. When you are in here, then you will see your morphs listed, and you can drag a little slider, which we see there, turns our morph amount up or down. Notice, of course, here in the case of this object, it's a subpatch object, and the subdivision order is currently set to first. We can set that to any point after morphing. In this case, I'll just go for last, and we see, of course, that we are getting a different shape come out now because of the subdivision order of our mesh. That has, of course, got nothing to do with the morph itself. The morph is still the same. Same vertices are being moved the same way and the same amount. If we click the envelope here, then we can see that the morph is a channel. It is specifically a channel of the object that it belongs to. So of course you have the ball with its channels position X, Y, Z and so on. And of course it has a morph group set which will contain all of the morphs. This means that you can drive a morph channel in the same way that you would drive any other channel, either via expressions or modifiers here in the graph editor, by keying it directly. And of course you can also grab this channel as a reference for something else. So you could have the position of a null being affected by what value a morph was set to. A little unconventional and probably of limited use, but it is possible. So let's look at a couple of other details of the morphs here. First of all, just a quick note about the naming of them. If I create another endomorph here, and this time I'm going to call it set2.new morph, let's say, and create that. We jump into layout and we see that it is auto updated. We've now got two endomorphs here, and we see what the dot naming has done. I've got this set2 there. This allows you to create little groups of morphs together. You would probably find this useful in something like a face rig, where you might have a set of morphs for the eyes, a set of morphs for the mouth, so you would have eyes dot, left, right, open, close, mouth, dot, pucker, smile, etc. Just helps you with organisation, really. And of course you notice there's our second morph added there. The other thing that's very important to understand about morphs is that they are a linear transformation. So here I've got something, I'm going to create a nice new morph for it. I'm going to call it bend, and I'm going to make it this morph here, have my portion here rotated around like this. Now, what we see happens here in layout when we put our morph on is that the section does not rotate, rather it smushes. This has nothing to do with the object subdivision order. This, of course, is not a subdivision object, but you can see what is happening there. If we look at the actual mesh from above here and watch where all of the points move, you'll notice that they all move, each and every point, in a perfectly straight line from the start position to the end position. It looks like we've got a bit of rotation going on there, but you can see the part squashing and stretching. This is because each point is travelling in a straight line. So of course this is a totally different result than if you stuck a bone in there and rotated it. This is important to remember because it means that there's a limitation to what you can do with morphs and how you can use them. Most specifically, you can't set up bits that need to turn round corners to use morphs. At least not without having additional morphs in there that add on top to try and manage the effect. This is the other thing that's important to understand about morphs, is that their positions are all additive. Notice here we'll create another morph. I'll just call it, I don't know, morph 2, and what I'm going to do in this instance is take a bunch of vertices here and I'm going to move them directly back here in the Z direction. We pop back to layout, there's our morph 2. Now the Z direction is going that away, up screen as it were. Let's see what happens when I turn on morph 2. There we go. We see that all of those are going up in Z. Notice that when we take bend back down to 0 here, there they are up in Z like that. The two positions of the two different morphs are being added on top of one another. Clearly here, morph 2 is moving these vertices that away. Now when bend is applied, that away for these vertices has become that a direction, but the morph 2 does not push them in that direction, it pushes them straight up. Not only are they additive, they are also done in object space. An alternative type of morph that does appear in other packages but we do not have in Lightwave is the tangent space morph. That would morph the vertices relative to themselves. So had we tangent space morphs, then when I pushed on morph 2, the vertices would go off to screen right there. Lightwave does not have that, so you must understand how morphs will interact. And that is namely that the points will always move in the object space, and morphs, when combined with one another, are additive. So if a vertex moves 1 meter on the Z in morph 1 and it moves 1 meter on the Z in morph 2, when both morphs are applied at the same time, the vertex will move 2 meters on the Z. So linear, additive, and object space. What we also need to see is how morphs interact with bones. Of course, bones are a kind of displacement applied to the mesh, and so is the morph. We've taken a look at how morphs interact with other morphs. We need to see how they interact with bones, and we can see here that I've got a simple little morph that pushes some vertices out there. So let's give this bone a bend then. We'll just bend it down like this, and let's turn up our morph. Well, we can see that the vertices are indeed going out there. In this case, we see that the vertices are going out in the direction that they were originally pointed in the morph. This is no longer going out in the object space, it is going out in the bone space, if you will. What is really happening, of course, is there is an evaluation between the order in which the morph is applied and the bone is applied, or rather the deformation and displacement from each, which order they get applied in. In this case, what is happening is the bone is being applied first, or the deformation from the bone is being applied first, then the deformation from the morph is being applied. This can be altered in Lightwave, and we see it here on the Bone Properties panel with Use Morphed Positions. What this does is to switch the order, so the morph is applied first, and then the resulting morphed geometry gets deformed by the bones. And as we see, what happens when we turn that on is that the vertices don't just come out, they go up a bit as well. Essentially, it is like we had this shape modelled. No morph, this was just the model the way it is, and now we are bone deforming it. Notice as well that this used morphed positions is for all bones in a hierarchy. You can't toggle it on a bone by bone basis. So that means it's on for the entire mesh or it's off for the entire mesh, much like the fall off type was, or the fall off distance. This distinction between the bone and morph displacement order of course has ramifications any time you're mixing bones and morphs. One common place where its effects can be seen is in face rigs. For instance, here we have a face rig that is composed of morph targets, and those are being driven through expressions by the positions of these nulls. What we also have is a series of bones, or joints I should say, singular joints, which are also skinned to the mesh. This means that we can create a pose, say open the jaw here, and we can grab these joints and start, reshaping the lip a little bit. Let's pay close attention here to exactly what happens. I'm going to bring the lip, let's say, forward here on the Z. So I'm just going to, drag that bit of it out that much. We can see that when I apply the morph by moving the controller, the amount that the lip is stuck out is the same. That doesn't change. However, notice when I turn on use morphed positions for these joints, suddenly the deformation on the lip goes away. Why is that? Because the morph has been applied to the mesh, and then this joint here is trying to influence it, but because it's so far away from the points that it's influencing, it has very limited influence. And we see that as the jaw closes, now the lip pops out, and as we open it up, the lip loses its joint deformation. It's as if the mesh were down here and we were manipulating this joint. As you can see, it's not really reaching those vertices that well, it's catching other vertices. So there we go. Those are the basics of morphs in Lightwave, as well as the specifics of how they behave and how they interact with other deformers that we have going on there. All of which is highly important if we want to make sure that we're going to get the right results out of our rig when we are mixing up these kinds of controllers and deformers with one another.